But we have all heard how President Trump accused his predecessor, Biden, that he, in his actions, had undermined the faith in the dollar and pushed, as he put it, BRICS to search for alternative payment platforms. This process, which the current President of the United States has pointed out, is now accelerating not only within BRICS, and of course, not only Biden is to blame for this, and not only the sanctions, which, by the way, the current leader of the United States is not only in no hurry to abolish, but also to increase. The discussion of the relevant proposals of the American side continued on December 2nd. As you know, during the visit to Moscow by the U.S. Special Envoy to the President, Stephen Witkoff, the agreement on the continuation of this work has been reached. The main thing is the fundamental understanding that stable regulation is impossible without eradicating the root causes of the crisis. The root causes are well known. President Putin has repeatedly spoken about them. Despite the need to acknowledge the reality, London, the leadership of the European Commission in Brussels, and the majority of NATO and EU member states are taking a frankly destructive position on the Ukrainian issue. Having invested all their political capital in the war with Russia, the hands and bodies of Ukrainian citizens, they are still in hopeless political blindness, enjoying the illusion of winning our country one way or another. As the President stressed, we are not going to conquer Europe. We do not have such thoughts, but we will respond to any hostile steps, including the relocation of European military contingents in Ukraine and the expropriation of Russian assets. We will respond to this. We are ready for this response. We will continue, and this is absolutely not subject to any re-examination. We will continue the independent foreign policy course, which implies the protection of national interests and simultaneous strengthening, readiness for the strengthening of multilateral mutually beneficial relations with everyone who is ready to work with us equally, with mutual respect for the generally recognized norms of international law. Of course, the situation is evolving to a certain extent, and new facts are emerging, but in general, the trend remains unchanged. The West is not united, and this is once again confirmed by the events of the last few days, when President Trump, in one of his interviews, fundamentally assessed the actions of Europe on artificial restraint of the agreements that could well have been reached under Ukrainian regulation, ensuring the liquidation of the very reasons that are the main obstacle on this path. But Europe artificially restrains this process, tries in every possible way to narrow down the so-called Ukrainian leader, members of his regime, so that they do not stop fighting until the last Ukrainian. The truth is that there is not enough money, and now financial considerations affect this ideological alertness, because in addition to robbing the Russian Federation and taking away our gold and foreign currency reserves in violation of all conceivable norms of international and commercial law, they have no other sources of financing for this war. This is despite the fact that more and more countries, including a number of members of the European Union and opposition parties in the EU and NATO countries, recognize the senselessness and hopelessness of the continuation of this policy. But Europe is blinded by the desire to cause Russia a strategic defeat. They cannot imagine it, and some even admit in interviews, in conversations with journalists, that they do not think of a situation when they will have to swallow the defeat of their opponent and have to admit, to reconcile with the fact that Russia will achieve its legal and just goals. It is clear that these are their problems. But as they say, They themselves have created these problems. They themselves are aggravating them. They themselves are trying to hold on to an absolutely hopeless line of conduct. But on this background, the United States is more and more impatient. First of all, President Trump, who, as I have already said, is the only one of all Western leaders, immediately after coming to the White House in January this year, began to show understanding of the reasons that made the war in Ukraine inevitable. These are the reasons that are at the heart of the hostilities against the Russian Federation, which the West and Trump's predecessor Biden and his European subordinates have been enduring for many years, and now is the culmination of this whole story. And the fact that President Trump has agreed, having analyzed the situation, that the primary reason for Russia's designation must indeed be eliminated is both the inability to involve Ukraine in NATO and the need to return to the people whose rights were trampled upon by those who came to power as a result of the 2014 coup. This is being actively discussed now. And of course, I must mention that the only Western leader who cares about human rights in this situation is Donald Trump. I hope I am not revealing too much, but in the proposals that Stephen Witkow brought, which were discussed in detail with the President of the Russian Federation, there is a special need to ensure in Ukraine what will remain of Ukraine, the rights of ethnic minorities and religious freedoms in accordance with international obligations. And, by the way, it is good that we are talking about this now, because it is very indicative that the amendments to this American document, I understand that they are still classified, but nevertheless, human rights cannot be classified. So, the proposals I quoted from the American side to ensure all international obligations of Ukraine in relation to human rights and religious rights were altered in the European interpretation. And what we have seen now speaks in a different way and urges Ukraine to follow all the norms in relation to minorities and religious freedoms that have been adopted in the European Union. As they say, feel the difference.